Hi everybody, this is On, and I'm coming to you with part 3 of this 3-part series, which is on the breaking down of humanity. And this has been such an important series for us to look at. As always, we have an incredible wealth of information and topics and things like that that are in our world today and that we need to be paying attention to. And these pieces are not always the pieces that we want to look at or that we enjoy looking at or that we like looking at, but they are critical pieces for us to be aware of. And in part 3 of this series, I'm actually going to be talking about the credibility crisis, which is the third key component, the aspect of where we are really in dangerous territory, where we are in that place of losing, in some ways, our country here in America. When we go through these cycles and these processes, and it is at the crisis point that we are in one of our most vulnerable states in things. And in the first 2 parts, I looked at in part 1, laying down the narrative, and then in part 2, and making a call out to liberals and coming back to some core principles in things that can help unite us together. And then in part 2, I looked at some other aspects that had to do with how we're being used as a human experiment in this world right now. And again, these are not necessarily the most comfortable and the most pleasant things to talk about, but they are things that are critical for us to know right now. So as we move into part 3 here, the credibility crisis, and what the credibility crisis is it's the phase where we really break down the self-worth, we really break down any resistances a lot of times where people might be holding on to their faith and their hope and their attempts to get through things. And this is the point where we start to realize it creates a huge space of unsafety. And once we're in a space where we don't feel safe, then it makes it very hard to manifest everything. I mean, it's extraordinarily challenging to just survive. We start moving into spaces of fear and paranoia, and as we've already learned in this series, that can bring in a lot of different components that make us susceptible to the programs, to making us break down and give in and go with things that really are not favorable things. And it stimulates these kind of mass hysterias and mass aspects of fear. And the key is for us not to be afraid of these things, but to realize, hey, this exists, and this is an opportunity for us to do something. We're still at a point that we can make a change, even though it feels overwhelming. And in the credibility crisis stage, what we're looking at is we're looking at this dynamic where nothing feels safe. You see your food becoming contaminated. You see your water becoming contaminated. Your things that are your basic needs. You can't get medical care if you need it. You see corruption of people who are doing unethical things, as we pointed out in the experiment stage. You see the air is being polluted, and it's got the chemicals in it and the chemtrails that are running and these different things, and you are finding out you can't rely on your information sources. You're finding out people in government positions that are supposed to be there to serve and protect you in many ways are actually perpetuating the corruption and are making you even more unsafe. You are at a point where you fear people of different ethnicities, different viewpoints. You start fearing the police. Everything seems to have this corruption in it. Nothing seems to feel safe when you hit a credibility crisis. And again, these foundations and this groundwork has been getting laid for a really long time. And it is in the stage that people become traumatized, they become stressed, they become depressed, they get angry, and then that's where they make themselves susceptible to being programmed. And this is where they start accepting the offered solution and things, because this is really promoting the fear and the helplessness tremendously. And, you know, again, particularly they will attack food supplies, pet food, baby food, things like this, which really pulls at our hearts. But what we're really seeing here is the problem, reaction, solution model playing out once again in things. So they create the problem by poisoning something, by making something unsafe, by making something scary. And then they get you in that reaction stage where you're defenseless. And then they come along and they say, oh, well, here's the solution. All you have to do is go along with our plan. All you have to do is give up your house. All you have to do is obey by our every order, things like this. And these steps have been taken. And what's scary for many people is that it's the very organizations that they trust, like the FDA, the CDC, and the WHO, and these different organizations that have become so corrupt. They might have started in the, you know, in a good place, but then a lot of them, again, they were set up to be a part of a network to support different things. And so they were set up to build your trust up in them. And then now that they're betraying your trust and that they are not working in your best interest, you don't want to see it. And this is where we're at with a lot of people. And so once we get into the stage of vulnerability, the stage of fear, the stage of helplessness, that's when we can get into being programmed. And that's when we end up accepting whatever solution they're offering, right? The only way you're going to get your freedom back is if you take a vaccine. The only way you can gather with family on 4th of July is if you take a vaccine. You see, they're offering, here's your solution to get out of your so-called pain, which we put you in to start with. We have to stop buying into this, and we have to start thinking again, and we have to find our ways to get out of the trauma. We have to find our ways to come into clear heads and to question things and to look at things. And I know it's time consuming, and I know it can be draining at times. I know it can be overwhelming at times, but it is important to get down to the actual facts of things and not just all these so-called fact checkers, which are not, they're part of the propaganda. They are not, they're telling the truth. We've been through this. Okay, but what they're trying to do in this aspect in order to gain control is they keep corrupting every little piece in things, and that starts to convince people that they will make certain that everyone is safe if they're connected to the agenda. So, I mean, this is that second layer of corruption that I was talking about in part 2. And this is the layer, this is the final step before moving into being under a totalitarian or authoritarian rule in things. And so they start to convince people that they are absolutely helpless without them. And this is like the abuser that convinces the person that they're abusing that they are totally helpless without them, and that the abuser is the only one that can help them. And the abuser is the only one that's going to take care of them. That is exactly what we are experiencing in our world right now. Now, when we look at the energy of a credibility crisis in the realm of codes, credibility on its own, in its pure state, fills us with abundance. It fills us with a generosity, a kind heart, an ability to willingly want to share what we have in excess of with others who are in need. And this works in the aspects of our soul self. This is in alignment. But when that energy turns into distortion, it becomes about greed. It becomes about breaking the ability to support oneself. It becomes about putting somebody in a poverty or a deprivation mindset. And when we look at credibility crisis, and again, crisis is specifically about creating turbulence to disorientate people so that they are so absorbed by the drama that they can't think straight and that they can't operate on their own. And when the credibility and the crisis code patterns come together, it is a direct attack on the soul, on the spirit. It is a direct movement towards isolating anybody who does not play in the narrative. It is a direct attack to deprive anybody who won't be a part of the game. And this is what the code energy is showing for that. And so it really is, it's laid out right there. And when we look at how these pieces come together, that's exactly what's happening. It's breaking the spirit. When we run into these things and we think, I don't know if I can trust the drinking water in my, that comes out. I don't know if the water that comes out that I bathe in is going to be safe to bathe in. I don't know if the food I give my animal or my baby is going to be safe for them to eat. And, now they're showing this toxicity or that or this. And a big way to get out of credibility crisis, for one thing, is taking accountability. Paying attention to things, using the things that we can as resources, and to stop supporting the people who are operating in unethical ways, who are presenting themselves to be something that they aren't, who are operating in ways where they might present themselves to be healthy, but then they're supporting dictatorship rules, or they're supporting corruption in other ways, that are supporting organizations that perpetuate hate and violence and things like that. So, we have so much more power, and I know I say this a lot, but we do. We have so much more power than what we realize or that we give ourselves credit for. So I think that this is really important, and I just have really a couple of things that I'm going to come in and share. So let me pull up the screens here where I can share things with you and get that on there. So now as we shift in, I've got a screen up here that is an FDA government screen. And while there are a lot of things that I find to be incredibly corrupt in the FDA, and there's a lot of payoffs there. You have to do your digging to find out about all of that. I don't have time to go into all of that today, but they are one of the corrupt things, and they were one of the ones that were was put under the pretense of, look, we're protecting you by having these regulations. Now, remember what I've talked about already in the series in regards to regulations. And this is a way of turning our power over to a government who doesn't necessarily have our best interest, but they appear to have our best interest at heart. And they are, they will allow things to come through that are incredibly dangerous, but when something doesn't play in the narrative, then they really come down on it. And instead of staying neutral and just saying, hey, this has shown up or that has shown up, and being a source of information and awareness, they don't do that. They play all of these political games and things. And, ultimately, when we get down to, when we're aligned with the soul self, when we're walking in that path of God, we take accountability for ourselves. That is part of the soul's path. That is part of being in the soul's energy, is that you don't rely on everybody else to take care of you. You learn how to take care of yourself. You learn what is good and not good. And you don't wait for some organization or group or government to come and put in a restriction before you stop doing something that is unhealthy for you. It's not up to them to do all of this for you. It's up to you to say, I'm not going to purchase that. Okay, this company is operating in a way that I don't like. So we really shouldn't be relying on all of these regulations to handle things for us. That's a bottom line aspect there. You have to take accountability for yourself, and especially in periods of credibility crisis, because you're not going to get the truth from these organizations, and you have to stop and say, I don't want to support that. Okay? You're not stopping them from doing business. You're not canceling them out or any of those things. You're simply choosing to support those who are operating in ethical ways. And this is a choice you have with or without the regulations. And the biggest impact, the biggest way that we can get the shifts made is through personal accountability, is through saying, I won't do business with you as long as you're putting this out. And these companies will change, and we've proved it over and over again, that they will change their tone when they cannot be accountable to their stockholders, when they are finding that people aren't buying their products anymore. I mean, look, just recently, the Grammys, even for example, people are fed up, and they are 50% below what they were the year before. People are like, not doing this anymore. We're not going to support you anymore. So, you know, when they have to go back and tell their advertisers, well, nobody was watching our show anymore because we were, you know, jerks and we're supporting propaganda. Well, you know, that's where you make the changes. Okay, and certainly they have the freedom to continue on the path they're having, but when people don't support them, it's unlikely that they're going to continue in that direction. So again, this personal accountability is something I talk about really a lot in the codes, as far as we have to be proactive in our own process. And we don't have to attack people. We don't have to tear down their businesses. We don't have to be violent. We don't have to do any of that. It's about simply saying, this is what works for me or this is what doesn't work for me. And I have a lot of places that I have just simply said, you know what, it's not worth it to me to do business under certain conditions. Or as I find out things, it's like, that's not something I want to support or have in my life, because it's no longer important to me. I'm no longer worried about something maybe from a vanity aspect or from an aspect of materialism. You know, when you step out of the materialism, you let so many of these things go in life, and it's a good feeling. You know, it's a good feeling when you align. But we do have the USDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration site, and you can actually come in here and check with these things. And so many of these things, what we have to be careful of is, one, this can be a good resource for us to look and say, okay, where are they targeting? Where are things coming up? And, you know, I didn't get into looking at all of these companies, but maybe they're targeting certain companies, or, you know, certain companies might be getting sabotaged because they're not following a political agenda. But at minimum, we can look at it and say, how much of this is coming up? And you can see here, just even in the last couple of days, over the last week, you know, there are several things that are coming up, and they'll tell you, you know, what it's about. Is it a drug? Is it a food and beverage? Is there, and some of these things are really basic recalls on things. They might be just something's expired. They want to make sure it's pulled from the shelves. They may have changed an ingredient. The labeling might not be correct. So there might not actually be something wrong with the product itself, but it is there. And yet other times there could be actual products. So this has a two-edged sword for us. This is part of getting us to twist our distortion. This is part of building the trust of, look how we're going to help you. But at the very same time, it's also implanting a program in our mind that things are unsafe, that we can't trust what's being put out there. It's also implanting things of, look, we've got to show you this because you can't find it out for yourself. And this is a way of showing, look, you need us to be in control of your life. And so, again, even organizations like this, we're going to have to hold accountable. to these things. And it's important to pay attention, because when you have lots and lots of things coming up, and they have pages and pages of things here, you know, that are coming up, all of these little recalls and things like that, they come into your mind. Again, it puts you in that vulnerability space of, I'm not safe. Is this product going to be safe? You know, wow, there were recalls on 6 products last week. I wonder if the product I'm buying today is okay. And I don't have a way to know that. So it starts to perpetuate that fear aspect in us, instead of providing us with the peace of mind. And the mind naturally starts to go down that path. Now, we did also, you know, throughout time, there's been a lot of different things where we're in sort of war times, or when groups or organizations or governments or whoever is trying to take command of things, they often will create these instabilities. And, you know, biblical and prophecies even talk about, you know, these things. So there's a lot of that playing into people's minds right now in the credibility crisis aspect. We see it in the news reports. Look, you can't trust policemen. If you get stopped, you're of a certain ethnicity, they're just going to shoot you. These are all about breaking down credibility. Okay. Look, the police force isn't credible, is what they're telling you, or look, your food isn't safe, or these things. And we see it in all of the news narratives of where they're trying to break down that credibility, if we're paying attention to it. We had one incident recently, again, because in biblical and the prophecy areas, they talk about, you know, the famine, and they're already putting that fear in with climate crisis, that they're trying to use that to generate the famine, to generate shortages and things. And again, this is coming back to those control factors. You will get what we give you. They're trying to moderate. I mean, even Biden has put something out recently in the last few days, but you know, you're not going to be able to eat beef. You'll only be able to get lab-created beef. Well, we know from my previous videos that ties in with Gates, and he's already got everything set up to do lab-created meat. I mean, these are the aspects that we see. In Florida, we had this incident that came up that, you know, we don't think about the water system in our cities, and this happened in Tampa area, where they tried to poison the water with lye. And people don't understand how that can happen, because they just think that there's, you know, they don't think of how much is set on to AI. They don't realize how much is set on to technology, and even the water systems in most places are, and they have the programs that they use that monitor what goes into the water, how it's filtered out, things like that. And so somebody literally hacked in to the control of a plant operator's machine, you know, just like, you know, elections stuff are hacked into, or other things are hacked into. You know, a hacker goes into a program. Same concept. And someone had taken control of this remotely, and in a matter of minutes, they increased the sodium hydroxide in the drinking water by a factor of 100. And then they, after spiking the substance to unsafe levels, they left the system. And so fortunately, the plant operator caught it very quickly, and they reset it. They got it back to normal parameters. But this is how easy it is. It's not hard to do it. And the water systems, we have to be very careful for, because the water systems, like sunlight, like our basic elements, all of our basic elements, is the necessary sustenance for all of life on Earth. You know, your oxygen, your air, your earth for things to grow in, your water sources, and your sun source. These are your 4 key elements of earth, air, water, and fire. And so when those things are damaged, life isn't going to exist on the planet. You know, this is This is getting into big stuff that, again, we think this stuff is crazy, but think about some of the things that we have going on in our world and have, over the last year, that if somebody told you that was going to happen 5 years ago, you would have said they were totally crazy. Well, these things sound crazy, but that doesn't mean that they're not happening. It sounds out there for some people, but it doesn't mean that it's not happening, because these things are happening. And actually, the history, there's a whole history behind water contamination, and the Smithsonian magazine put this out in there, and it had to do with ISIS, the terrorist group, going into Iraqi and seizing things, and they were trying to seize, I think, property maybe in this situation. They were trying to seize control of people, and they were going in, they were murdering people, they were creating these mass graves, other people were sold into slavery, so on and so forth. And you think, well, what does that have to do with water? Well, again, when you're contaminating the basic resources, like throwing chemtrails and chemicals into your air, trying to block the sun out, utilizing high EMF equipment, and going in and changing, what's in a drinking water for a city. Again, people are far more controllable in a city than they are in an area like I live in, where there's natural springs that we can go to and get our water from, and that cannot be contaminated so easily, because it doesn't run on a program. It just comes out of the earth, and so it's a different aspect. And what they do with this thing is they go in and they do this to just kind of stir up people's lives, and they then get into the landscape and they realize that these people that are farther out in some of these little villages and areas like that, that they're heavily reliant on their water sources. They're heavily reliant on those things. So they would come in and, poison the water areas, which means the cattle, the livestock, the plant life, everything starts becoming destroyed. Everything goes into these kind of drought and famine aspects where things can't grow. And they would sabotage almost every well. And like, we have a lot of wells out where I live. People have wells, and when you get into rural lands, you're on wells a lot of time. And they might shut off the source that allows for a well there. They might jam something up. They might put in debris or rocks or things like this. Different things can be poured into a water system. Again, then it cascades and it poisons in through everything. So in doing this, what it does is it reduces your big, lush agricultural district to just a parched wasteland. It just basically turns it into a desert of dust and bare fields. And by the time they would loot, they'd destroy, they'd murder, they'd kill, all of these things. And there have been a variety of things in the control aspects where the poisoning of water, how much was real and how much was a psychological attack or tactic, where they would say they poisoned something, but maybe they didn't. But the fact that everybody thought it was poisoned, that put them into a slavery situation, that put them into a submission situation. And again, that is not in alignment with our soul self. So it was all about putting people in a helpless position, is what we find in this. So this concept of poisoning water and stuff is not an old one. Of course, in the olden days, where there weren't all of the technological things like airplanes and stuff like that, water was the key source that they could go after. Now, the more and more that we move into an AI society or a technological society, the more susceptible we are to all of the other things also being able to be contaminated. Again, our air, uh, blocking out the sun, and of course the sun is needed for photosynthesis and things. So this is coming back up again, and it is a scary piece. It is a piece that we are going to need to be very careful of, and that we are going to have to pay attention to. And it's very, very important that we do not play into these agendas, that we do not play into these fears, that we do not play into these tactics, and that we make sure that we're paying attention. Again, we can't sit there and rely, because oftentimes these groups are protected. If you get into a lot of the different societies and times, and when these heavy command groups have been in play, they're connected with the terrorist groups. They're not protecting the people from them. They're connected with them. And so we have to, this brings us back to personal accountability, and another reason why we don't want to get too centralized in everything. You know, this is why we want to get back to those foundational roots of what the true roles were, and not having so much interference in the personal lives. And instead of, you know, just saying, well, you know, we want people to do these things for us, teaching our children how to be self-sufficient, because that is what will see us through going forward. And we might ask, oh my God, these things become so heavy, and they're, you know, what do we do if all this stuff is happening? What do we do? How do we bring an end to this? And that is where values come into place. That is where these core, non-tangible aspects come into place, which is why we have to protect these basic rights of freedom, these basic rights of choice. We don't have to agree with everybody, but we need to allow these differences and variety. And the more centralized something becomes, and the more that we turn our power over to a centralized setup, the less diversity there's going to be. They're not going to allow for diversity because they only want what fits into their mindset. So you're actually suffocating. You're removing rights from people. You're not just restricting people, but you're completely moving towards extermination of people and cultures and differences. And this is because our differences actually do make us stronger, instead of being what is a problem to us. And this is why we need to be working together instead of fighting with each other. And so we have to hold this consciousness, and there are key components, which are love, compassion, truth, resilience, and gentle strength, which will put an end to these things. And integrity, definitely integrity, it goes hand in hand with truth. It will put an end to these narratives, to these controlling structures, to putting people into slavery conditions, because we know over and over again these controlling structures put people into slavery. They wipe out the middle class, and what they do, regardless of what they say, because remember, they have no problem mind, what they do is there's the elite who live very well, and then there's the peasants. And there is no middle ground in there. You have masters and you have slaves. And that's exactly what those societies create. And this is not in divine alignment. This is not walking God's path, and this is not the soul's path. This is distortions, this is corruption, it's a whole lot of things. But if we're holding love, if we're holding compassion, if we're holding truth and integrity and resilience and moving forward in gentle strength, instead of constantly fighting with each other or hating each other or being in division with each other, then we have the power and the ability to bring an end to most all of our struggles in this world. We have an ability to have an incredible life, to have a safe world, but we have to create that. And we're not going to get there if we're playing in the narratives. And we will know these components when we look at the codes. Love in the code work that I do actually is about opening up the prosperity within us. It's about healing. It is about being victorious over what tests us and what challenges us and what puts initiations in our path. And compassion is the great teacher. Compassion is what leads us towards success by sharing or through sharing experiences with each other. So you see, when we're in isolation and we're not sharing experiences, we're going to be challenged. And it leads us to have success by thinking for ourselves through critical reasoning, through finding our own path, our own way. And that doesn't mean that you're not caring about others or the community, contrary. But there is a balance. We need to find that balance between caring for the community and caring for the individual. Neither can be 100% sacrificed. And that is why we have to keep coming back to unifying, why we have to keep coming back to not making it an either-or situation. I believe that we truly can have both. And truth like love is about victory. It is about giving us the strength or having the strength to get through the challenging times, the times that just feel like now, through a crisis energy. And it is about the journey, and it reminds us that we have to be persistent. We can't just get relaxed or stop things because they ease up a little bit or because we get a little respite period. We have to stay on top of these things. Resilience, also like compassion, is about teaching. It's about the journey of the self. And that doesn't mean excluding others. It means the journey of knowing our divine self, being in our divine self regardless of the circumstances. It is about having the trust and the faith and the true knowledge that can see us through anything. And then gentle strength actually opens the door, and gentle strength is the key component which removes us from tyrants. It removes us from those that try to bully us, those that try to suppress people, those that put people against us, even our own friends and our family and the people that we care about, for the sake of control and command. So gentle strength is what actually does that. And there are aspects that will help us see when we are making progress, when we are moving out of the crisis. And the things that we will see is not always going to be pretty. There's no question about that. But you will see that there will be less and less fear in people. There will be more relaxation in people. There will be more empathy coming up in people. There will be more heart-centered approaches. But, so much of this aspect is that they will start to remove the evidence of their actions. So when they feel that they're losing control, they're going to start removing the evidence of their actions. And they do this to erase people's knowledge of how the corruption works. Because if they remember how it works, then they can keep passing that information down through generations, generation after generation after generation. And they don't want that, because if that information's there, then people will see what's happening, they'll know it, they won't fall prey to it. But if they erase the information, then they become vulnerable again, and they only have to wait 20, 30 years or whatever for a new generation to come in, and then they can start all over again, and they start their patterns again, and people are like, oh, I don't even know what's happening, and it goes right under people, and they work on that for a couple of generations, and then the next thing you know, we're, in a big place like we are now in our world. So we saw this when elderly patients were, they pushed coronavirus positive people into elderly nursing homes, things like that, and they infected the nursing homes. And you have to stop and think, why would they attack people in nursing homes? Who are they going to bother? Who are they going to hurt? Well, they attack those people because they hold the knowledge. This is also why they wanted to make so much fear around children seeing their grandparents, because children listen to their grandparents far more than they listen to their parents. And so that interaction is very precious, very special in there. And so the grandparents then have the ability to pass that information on to children. They're teaching them different things. They're keeping the love alive. And so that made them a group that was targeted. And that's why they do it, because also in these older generations, some of the people that are much older, they remember the days of the Nazi regimes. They remember the prison camps. They remember the Great Depression. And here again, these are patterns today that are repeating our history. And so by alleviating them, they get rid of that knowledge. It's a way of removing the evidence, as we call it. So that's why some of these things were put into place. And when you remove those sources of information, like in the grandparents or the older generations, then children become fully programmable because they don't have anybody else giving them a different input. This is why China, the CCP, has taken such strong control over what the children get in their educational system. Okay, this is also why they seek to do censorship. This is why they want to tear down statues, especially Civil War statues or things connected to the South, because if they don't, eventually people are going to bring the truth out. They're going to find out the truth in history. So by destroying these things, they're removing the evidence of their previous corruption. This is why oftentimes when people start to get caught in political arenas, all of a sudden it's like, oh, all the files are deleted. Oh, we don't know what happened to that. Oh, the emails are gone. Oh, correspondence, I don't know. You know, and it's all this black. And then, you know, and then you start having retractions, and then you're seeing people removing posts and things like that. Well, as they get deeper and deeper in, and the corruption becomes more and more exposed, and they become more and more scared, what we're going to be seeing is suicides and deaths. And this happened also in Hitler time. Hitler and all of his key players at the end did this. They suicided themselves to again hide the crimes, so to say, so that people couldn't prove things. And this is something that we still have coming up. And the codes, of course, in America talk about this really starting to come into play July 4th here of 2021 and running through July 3rd of 2022. So we have this big time period here where we're very likely to see much more of that. And it just reminds us again that you know, the codes for removing evidence is all about creating turbulence. It's all about removing what can teach us or tell us the truth. It's all about blocking us from learning from our past. That's what removing evidence is about. And, you know, we just don't have the luxury to become relaxed in our ways, and that doesn't mean that we have to be under all of this stress or things constantly, or to live in this fear. That's not the case at all. Again, the more that we bring love, the more we bring faith in, the more we bring hope and empathy, and that we unite with our differences and allow our differences to make us a stronger team together, then we naturally divert a lot of things. We naturally are setting up kind of like shields of protection. So, but we can't just get totally lazy and not pay attention to what's happening, because it is through, you know, paying attention to what's happening and what's being passed and stuff like that that we understand the truth of what's happening. And again, the truth is the soul's path, that it helps guide us, and it's so important. Suicide, sacrifice, and death, I think, are all things that are on the forefront. And once we start to see stronger aspects of that, we will know that there is a huge crumbling of the corruption going on. Some suicides will be termed natural death. They might be connected and saying, oh, this person had Alzheimer's or heart failure, and they've already set the narratives, right? We already see this. Biden's already, oh, his memory's gone, or, recently they came out about Pence, and he had to have standard heart valve stuff worked on. This is all setting the plane in case they decide they want to get rid of somebody. So sacrifice, sometimes a person is made. I talked about that in part 1. Where people are being sacrificed, they're being set up, and it can look like a suicide in some cases. In some cases it can look like, oh, look at this crime that happened or this incident that happened, and it becomes a staged thing in there. So really, when we get down to this, suicide is blocking us from being a team. That's one of the aspects in codes. It is refusing to be in true leadership. Sacrifice is done to deplete our abundance, to deplete our true values, to prevent us from wanting to give and to share with others. And then death is an aspect that is about relying on others to take care of us. It is an aspect that can go a lot of different directions depending on where we're standing with it, but a forced death, or as opposed to a natural death, let's take a look at, that has to do with, that will be connected to those that who have either been a betrayer or who have been betrayed in some way. And so it can be justified. But those, again, that are willing to stand resilient and strong will find successes, and the death will become a transformation instead of a physical death in there. So we really do actually have a lot of positive things, a lot of good things that we can look forward to, and a lot of positive areas to focus our energy. And I share these signs, again, because I think it's important for us to be aware, and it's important for us to be able to know maybe what are some of the signs that some of these corrupt structures in our world are coming down, are doing it, and that there is hope for humanity. Even in the midst of humanity, of these attempts to destroy humanity, we do have hope, and we do have power, and we do have the ability to change things. And I think that that's the really core pieces that we want to hold on to. So I really hope you've enjoyed this series and getting this information out, the breaking of humanity. And again, I apologize for the faux pas in 1 and 2. Boy, I'm going to get this down sooner or later. And, each time I'm going to get better with it. But if you'd like to check out more of the Code Journey work, you can certainly do that. That is on my website, compassioncodes.com. And every year I put out a new book on that, so that is there. If you like the spiritual essence of things, if you like the more spiritual lessons, the life lessons, I also have my regular YouTube channel, Jessie on Nichols George, just under my own name, that you can go to, and every month I'm posting in there as well. So I wish everybody well, and I will be seeing you next month.